Welcome to the show. In this one, I have a conversation with Anchorage-based photographer Kerry Tasker. Kerry says that to be a freelance photographer in Alaska, your skill set has to be versatile. Because Alaska is such a small market, there's not a whole lot of consistency in the type of work you do. Meaning one day you might be taking headshots for a business, and the next day you might be shooting video for a commercial. And whenever you have the time, you focus on your passion projects. This podcast is made possible through the generous support of the Crude Magazine Patreon subscribers. If you already subscribe to the Crude Magazine Patreon, thank you. For those listeners who aren't, please consider subscribing at www.patreon.com/crudemagazine. That's patreon.com/crudemagazine. And pick the subscription tier that works for you. I want to thank everyone subscribed at the Company Man tier. These are the people who have subscribed to the Crude Magazine Patreon for $50 or more. Trina Duber, Seward Brewing Company, The Grind Coffee Shop in Juneau, Derek Adolph, Blue and Gold Board Shop, Sharon Liska, Alaska Surf Adventure, and Aquila Space. Thank you to all the Patreon subscribers. Your money and your support make these conversations possible. Okay, back to Kerry Tasker. Kerry says that to keep moving forward in a hyper-competitive field like photography, you can't stand still. You always have to be moving forward. That the reality is, you're only as good as your next project. Because people generally only see the last thing you did, not the last 10 years of your work. Which isn't a bad thing if you believe in natural progression or Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule. That the longer you do something, the better you become at it. So here he is, Kerry Tasker. This red light right here, it means we're recording.
Okay, fired up.
Crude conversations. Listen more, then you talk.
Go to work!
Can you hear my chair?
I can hear your chair, I think a little bit maybe.
What about that stuff?
But maybe it just adds to the ambiance.
Okay, yeah, let's be authentic.
Yeah.
And my chair is squeaky, so. How about when I'm drinking LaCroix?
Oh, you got a LaCroix?
Yeah, but I think you're supposed to pronounce the X. I think.
Are you? Because I thought I looked it up a while back and it said LaCroix.
No, it's LaCroix. I see an X and I want to say it.
Well, we're American.
Right.
So it sounds like you have your proper amount of liquids, right?
I mean, yeah. I might have to stop and get some coffee at some point, but...
Oh, you know what? I think I forgot my coffee in the kitchen, but I think I'm good right now. Sometimes you can have too much coffee.
I get there. I like to sip. I'll sip until the coffee gets cold, and then I'll have to, get a fresh cup.
You don't like cold coffee?
I'll drink it, sure.
Okay.
I'm not picky.
How much coffee is too much coffee for you?
Oh, if we get into the 3 or 4 cups, because I space it. I just sip. I don't chug.
Yeah.
So it's actually hard to tell because the coffee is just kind of always there.
Do some people chug coffee?
Well, I don't know. You slam it. You're in the morning and you drink your coffee, or maybe you have a task that requires you. You can't hold a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Are we doing the podcast right now? Is this?
Yeah, dude. We're easing into it.
Okay.
Is this weird?
No, that's kind of what I figured would happen. We're just gonna have a casual conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So we crossed paths the other day while I was out on a walk jog.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally got to see your son in person rather than on social media. And he was walking around and everything.
Yeah. No, he's a year and a half old. He's walking. He talks a little bit. Not a lot, but he says things. And he understands a pretty amazing amount. And more every day. It's pretty crazy.
What were his first words?
I think it was Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, like the Owen Wilson Wow. Me and Victoria were doing Owen Wilson Wows, and he like piped in. He was like, "Wow," like a little baby Owen Wilson Wow. So I'm pretty sure those were his first words.
Do you feel like you fully embraced the dad role, or are you still getting used to it?
No, I'm all in. We're basically 2 years into it now, so
You got to be.
um, yeah, no, I mean, if you don't go all in, I feel like you would be miserable.
Hmm.
Instead of like this, instead of a new chapter in your life, it would be like a burden. So, you can't look at it like that, or else everyone would be unhappy.
For sure. I feel like that sentiment can carry over to like your entire life. Like what that reminded me of, because I have no kids, is the very first time that I ever substitute taught was at this Montessori school that was like very weird. Like there's different variations or gradients of Montessori schools out there.
Hmm.
Some of them are just like kind of free thinking. It's the whole spectrum. Like they can be really weird where you're singing to the class, all the way to you're having students teach the class, right? So I was at the one where you're singing to the class, and I had this moment where the teacher aide was like, "Okay, well, we sing to the class as we introduce ourselves in the morning." And I had this moment where I was like, "Okay, my day can completely suck from here on out, or I can just completely embrace this and have like this momentous story of the very first time that I ever substitute taught." And I chose to embrace it.
What was the song?
Just introducing myself. So in that like split second moment where I made that decision, I was like, "My name is Cody."
That's what you have to do with this podcast from now on, right? That's how you introduce yourself, I hope.
Just sing.
We got to sing it. Should we sing the rest of this interview?
So it just turns into a musical.
No, never mind. That's a bad idea. That's a bad idea.
What, you don't like that?
Oh, your singing voice is better than mine. We'll just say that.
And mine's not good.
Yeah, I think if you want to turn it off, if you want people to shut it off right now, then yes, let's start the singing interview.
Frozen 3 featuring
Yeah.
Kerry Tasker and Cody Liska.
Yeah, real. I'm trying to think of a Frozen joke. I never saw any of the Frozen, so I don't know.
That's bold to try to make a Frozen joke and you haven't seen it.
Something about like, actually, it's lukewarm. Or nope. Shut it down.
So I feel like there's this moment in parenthood where everything changes. Basically, your life is no longer about you anymore, and you start to kind of direct all of your time and energy toward this other thing. Have you noticed anything like that happening to you?
Not in any kind of like dramatic sense. Uh, and honestly, I kind of feel like your priorities shift a bit and things change a little, but it wasn't this epiphany, or it's more of like a glacial like turn.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm totally fine with it, but there are moments where you're like, well, I can't go out to the bars and get wasted and come back super drunk, because you can't take care of a baby when you're super drunk, so
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like I did that very often anyway, but so in that sense, yeah, you suddenly are responsible for keeping this thing alive. But I don't know, it hasn't really been that hard.
I wonder if, you were just ready for it. Because one thing that I've heard from parents, it's almost like a cliche at this time, where they say, your entire life will be changed. Everything about your life will be changed. And if you think about it, it's completely true. For the most part, like the things that you do all the way down to like the most minuscule task changes when you have a kid, because you have to direct all of like they take precedent over every single thing. If you have a meeting and your kid has an ear infection, like you got to take care of the ear infection, you know?
Right, right. Well, I mean that I'm sure that's part of it, where there's, society tells you it's going to be this monumentous event. Um, but I was just thinking about it. One of the things that, well, the thing that changed our life in that direction, maybe more so than the baby, was we got a dog about 6 months before the baby was born,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a lot of work. Like we got this puppy, and he was like waking up, all night, and he was pooping all over the place, and we had never taken care of, we hadn't had a dog before. Well, I had a dog when I was a kid, but not as like an adult, and like that was a huge pain in the butt. So I feel like that sort of set us up to be ready for what the baby was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first couple months, the baby was waking up, and it was, you don't have a lot of sleep, and it's stressful, and I don't want to like downplay any of that. It's still a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't feel like I don't know what you call it. It didn't, it was life changing, but not like super life changing.
You guys kind of already broke yourselves in with the dog.
Exactly.
That's smart. Did you guys do that on purpose?
No, we the opportunity arose to get this puppy, so we jumped on it, and that was it. And we thought it'd be we thought it'd be super easy, like, oh, dog, yeah, no problem. But I don't know. In some ways, the dog was like harder than the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we might just have like a really cool, easy baby. So,
is it kind of crazy to look at where you were like a year ago compared to where you are now?
Yes, things have changed quite a bit, but it's not. I don't know. I'm trying to think of. It really hasn't been that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't have any like amazing insights or words of wisdom just yet, I guess.
Yeah, he's only what, 2?
He'll be 2 in September.
Okay, 2 in September. And I guess what I was thinking of is I know that you and your wife Victoria are very like mellow people, and I feel like my wife Kerry and I are also relatively mellow. And so our routine probably wouldn't be insanely altered by a child.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the going out to bars and things like that. Like we don't really do that. We've kind of passed that stage in life.
Right. And me and Victoria were like also like, oh boy, what happened? We went to some bar that we both used to love, and we walked in and we were like, something's different about this place. And we realized we were like 10 years older than everyone else in the bar. We're like, oh well, I guess that would do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, at some point your life kind of fits these extra animals
Mm-hmm.
in a way you didn't think it would before.
Yeah, I think maybe at a certain point you're just ready for the change.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are probably a lot of people that push back against that change. Like, oh, I'm not ready for that life of domesticity or, whatever, because you want to stay where you are if you're headed in a direction that you're unfamiliar with,
Mm-hmm. I'm not complaining. This is pretty great.
Yeah, dude, I'm happy for you.
We have a pretty nice little setup. Yeah. What about you and Kerry? What's going on there?
Are we thinking about having kids?
I mean, I don't know. Or a dog, maybe?
Well, we have 2 cats.
Oh, you have 2 cats.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at one right now as she cleans herself.
It's beautiful.
It really is. I feel like there's a variation of animals, cats and dogs, that they are either the very loud cleaner or like the silent cleaner. And this one is like just the loudest cleaner ever. Maybe it's like an excess of saliva or whatever. I just don't know.
It could be a combination of, saliva and hair density. And also licking technique.
Yeah.
Some cats just grow up and they don't learn the proper licking technique. And then you're stuck with like a really loud, gross cat.
Yeah, the thing is that is probably the only like gross feature about her, because otherwise she's just like the sweetest animal.
Well, and they will learn
Hmm.
by, if you show how to properly lick,
Yeah.
they'll pick that stuff up. They're smart animals.
Have you seen on I saw it on social media advertised to me, and it was this, like, not, it wasn't like a tongue attachment, but it goes in your mouth like, I guess, like a binky, and then on the other side it's like this tongue, and it's supposed to make it so you can actually clean your own cat.
Oh, like with your face?
Yeah, like a human can clean their cat.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right. I'm Googling that as soon as we're done here because that sounds hilarious.
It seems extremely toxic to the human feline relationship.
I think you need to get one and do an entire podcast on trying to get your animals to accept you as like the alpha cleaner animal in the household. You have to assert dominance.
I
Like,
do, yeah.
If you don't, they'll just clean wherever they want and as loud as they want. They're challenging your status right now.
I think they are, yeah. I'm surprised you can't hear her cleaning herself.
I think I can hear something.
You can, okay.
It's like an ocean far away.
Okay, so do you feel like your photography has taken a back seat or been deprioritized at all?
No, but we've worked pretty hard to set up a schedule where, I can still work and Victoria still works full time. So we're both, basically working full time and managing the baby as well. So,
Mhm.
certain things did shift. I don't run off to go shoot Northern Lights as much as I used to, but the Northern Lights are kind of cheesy anyway. So it it's like, it's all fluff there. So I don't need to be wasting my time with that anyway. But
Well, I had a question that was supposed to go later on, but it fits right here. And to your comment about Northern Lights being cheesy, I agree with, but not the way you shoot them. Like, I think that you have this just innate sensibility of what to shoot, like to make it like a Kerry Tasker photo. I don't even know what that is, but I mean, what compels you to take a photo?
ooh, we're jumping right into the. I guess the shorter answer is like a desire to create, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like everyone has that, right? Everyone's got these things that they do, and um, this just happens to be like what I love to do, and I've been doing it for I guess a pretty long time now. So, I don't know. Does that? Well, let's come back. Let's come back to the. Let me.
Mull it over.
I've got no cool answer for you just yet.
No, I think that right now, since we're so early on in the podcast, we'll come back to it and maybe we can kind of workshop an answer.
Okay.
So going back to your photography, have you found yourself doing more stable commercial work over passion projects at all?
Yes, I have been seeking out, more commercial work, more editorial stuff. Um, the passion projects actually sort of launched themselves, without me doing too much, into a couple of, well, like one of them is going to be a show at the museum. Actually, it's hung right now. It's just waiting for the museum to open. And then the other one was again at the museum. We were projecting images onto the side of the museum and some other buildings.
I remember that.
Yeah, and that was with the help of the museum and Ryan Marlowe and a few other people, and that was pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot of the nighttime light glacier stuff that we were doing.
And is that a collaborative effort, or is it like you come to them and you're like, hey, I have this idea, what do you think?
That was sort of a collaboration. Well, the images were mostly done already, so I had this library, and I had shown them at Aquila Space earlier, so the series was like in a place where you could display it.
Mm-hmm.
and then they had this idea to project them onto buildings. So, I worked with them, and we ended up doing it in a couple different buildings. And yeah, that at that point it was a collaboration. I was still doing the images on my own, but we were bringing them, bringing them to the museum, and then we were compiling them into, a slideshow that we could display on places.
Getting back to your job as a photographer, what does your job look like right now during the pandemic?
Oh, during non-existent. Yeah.
Okay.
It stopped the day that the city went into shutdown, like when the state went into shutdown. I was assisting on a clothing shoot in Homer. Like, we wrapped up the day Alaska shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And Homer was already pretty much shut down at that point. But I was doing some drone work and assisting for this multi-day shoot down there. And yeah, when we were done, it was like the whole state was done. And that was the last gig I've had. That was what, 8-9 weeks ago.
And it hasn't picked up at all since things are beginning to open back up?
No, I'm getting phone calls now, but things are scheduled pretty far out.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're looking at the shoots in June, July, and August. So the things are on the horizon again, but at the moment it's still, the businesses I work with, they're all sort of like, everyone is still in a holding pattern,
mm-hmm.
even though things are opening up again.
And I would imagine those dates are still tentative. Like, let's see what happens.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. What would your season, or what would right now look like if not for the pandemic?
I would have been doing some editorial work for a couple of local magazines, and there were a couple of big commercial gigs that got moved or totally canceled. So what tends to happen is these larger gigs kind of plant themselves a month or two out,
mm-hmm.
and then as the month goes by, I'll get phone calls for like, "Hey, can you do something tomorrow?" Or so it's all the smaller things like fill in the gaps around these larger projects, and that's kind of just how it works. And then, we just keep moving along that way. But we had a little bit of in-state travel we were going to do, and that is absolutely shut down. And so yeah, no, springtime is normally a pretty busy time for me. So this has been a little disappointing.
So what are you doing with all your free time?
It's funny. It still doesn't feel like that much free time because
mm-hmm.
I'm watching Rizzoli. Since we don't, we would use babysitters and grandparents to watch him,
mm-hmm.
and we had to scale all that way back. So it's basically been me, because Victoria still works full time.
Mm-hmm.
She works from home. Because the paper is still steaming right along.
And she's at the Anchorage Daily News.
Yes, she is.
And she's still doing features?
She does feature edits, and she's also one of the main desk editors.
I would imagine that a newspaper job right now is pretty interesting.
Well, they're certainly busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no shortage of work on their end.
I mean, basically, you plop all of the pandemic news on top of everything else that normally goes on.
Mm-hmm. If anything, they've been busier during this whole time.
Mm-hmm. Does it seem like she'll just randomly have to go out to work?
For the most part, no. She's got a pretty set schedule. She does stuff. Like what happened today is they changed the schedule on one of her projects, so she had to make sure it was like good to go. So that's why we had to move our podcast a bit. But that normally doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Normally it's pretty set schedule. So we have her schedule, and then I watch the baby, and then when she has time off, I go do my photo stuff. I've been doing a lot of I just continue doing my personal projects while during this time off. So. But last night I was actually at a Portage at like 2 a.m. It was like sideways raining. It was like gusting like 30 miles an hour, and I was like trying to get the drone to work, and the drone, I was like, okay, I'm going to lose the drone. So I use my car headlights to like light up there's a big chunk of ice sitting there right now. So I kind of got the car up on the curb and aimed the lights at the iceberg, and I was running all over the place and put some flashlights in the water and stuff. It was a lot of fun. I was the only one out there. I was like, man, I hope my car doesn't break down.
Is that ever worrisome to you, like going out on these missions by yourself?
Sometimes. I mean, it's always in the back of my head though. Boy, is this an unnecessary risk to take a couple of silly pictures? Yeah, I hope not. But I rarely put myself in actually dangerous situations. That doesn't happen very often.
Has there ever been a time where you do put yourself in that position and it hits you and you're like, oh shit, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But then after everything's said and done, you look at the photo and you're like, wow, I guess that was worth it.
Um, yeah, yeah. There's a couple of times when we may have pushed things a little too far to get an image. Um, last I want to say last fall, me and my brother and this guy Adam, this ice climber, we hiked up into uh, Byron.
Byron Glacier, right?
Yes, Byron Glacier, and it was cold enough that things were frozen. There might have been a little bit of snow on the ground. It might have been like an inch or two of snow. And at that point, that's kind of when I think it's like okay to go into ice caves. I don't go anywhere near them during the summer. They're just too unstable. But once things cool down, you're like, yeah, that should be fine. So we went into the ice cave at the bottom of the glacier there, and we just, we were following Adam's, where he was going. Me and Tiger were, and he just kept going and going and going and going, and we hiked about a mile under ice, and we came out the other side of the glacier. It was, I'd never done that before. We just popped out on the other side, and we had. I like to use road flares a lot because I think it does interesting. The light does interesting stuff with the ice, like the quality of it. So he circled back and went down a hole. He used his ropes to secure himself and like belayed back into the ice cave. And we were probably in that ice cave for 2 or 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw on a video someone sent a drone through the ice cave like a week later. And I saw like right where we had been standing, like a huge chunk of the wall had just come down. So I was like, oh boy, that is right where I was standing. So that was sort of an after the fact thing. There's a weird, I don't know what you call it when you're inside these ice caves, but like the back of my hair is like always on end. I was just like, there's a lot of ice directly above my head, and it's freaking me out. Like that little song is always playing in my head. So I don't, it's kind of justified at that point. But so I guess that was a situation where I didn't realize how risky things were until like a week later.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where if you put too much thought into it beforehand, you're just going to talk yourself out of it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like sometimes you can't mull over the why part of things too much. Like why are we sending this guy into an ice hole just to take a picture? Like it's just a photo, we're not going to change the world here. It's not even like an important photo. It's just, I thought it was cool looking, and actually I think we got some great stuff that night. But we're not changing the world. We're not, we were just fucking around basically. So but it was still a lot of fun.
Do you ever think about the trajectory of, your photo skills or you as a photographer, like looking back on maybe some of those super early photos and thinking about those missions versus more current missions?
I think about the trajectory stuff all the time. You look back at your old work and I think cringe is the right word for it. And you go, oh God. I some of my earlier stuff, I was like, I thank God like Instagram didn't exist yet, because I would have, boy. But I think like you're supposed to do that. Like if you look back at your old work and you're like, wow, that was the best thing I've ever done. Well, then you're totally failing at that point. Then,
Yeah,
like that's not the direction the curve is supposed to go in, man. So it's good when you look back and you go, oh, Jesus, like, why didn't anyone tell me that was that horrible? I rarely look back at stuff and like what I see, so I'm always trying to push forward.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that maybe you're just being hard on yourself?
No, I think everybody does that.
For sure, yeah. But as far as like not going back to those pieces of or those photographs, just completely avoiding them, because I've had that same thought about a lot of past projects that I've done, but then there are also a lot of past projects that I go back to and I'm still proud of.
Mm. Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. Like, there's little gems, you go back and you find these little gems, think, oh, okay, that was actually pretty good. But they're in like the sea of crap that they are floating in. Feels like it's much bigger than the sea of crap my gems are floating in right now.
Yeah.
So the sea is getting smaller and there's more gems, but it's still this like it's easy to look back and just see the crap, I guess.
Yeah, the crap always sticks out above the successes.
Yeah, to a certain, yeah, I guess it does. Maybe I'm just being negative or too hard on myself, but I think you kind of need to be a little bit to, like, if you want to keep pushing, you want to keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think, especially in like a hyper competitive field like photography, like you can't even like stand still. You always have to be like going in a direction. Like if you're not moving, then it feels like failure.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of a project that you would consider a failure, but a successful project that came afterward wouldn't exist without that failure?
Hmm. Um. Yes. So years ago, um, me and my buddy Ivan Knight, he's a musician. We've collaborated on a couple of our projects before. We were doing this series of photos, and each photo was a different science fiction trope. They're all portraits of women in like science fiction outfits,
Mm-hmm.
and each one was supposed to be like a trope from science fiction, like, and the whole thing was like sort of commentary on why in sci-fi like women's roles so often get stuck in these like 5 or 6 stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
So we did these pictures, and Ivan made this cool ambient music, and we built these like homemade soft boxes. We put a lot of work into this project, and we displayed it. It was at Sub-Zero, and without reading the the artist statement, you'd look at these pictures and you're like, it's a girl holding a squirt gun that's painted silver, or whatever,
Yeah.
or they're wearing an old ski mask that's you put lights on it, and that was it, you know. So that I felt like was like the pictures are pretty cheesy and the execution could have been better, and then the images didn't really stand on their, like, you would not see like, oh, sci-fi trope,
Mm-hmm.
that's not the first thing that comes to mind.
You needed context.
You needed the context of the artist statement, and the artist statement was like this tiny little piece of paper up in the corner. So I thought that was kind of, it was like, ugh, but like those pictures are, you're not going to find those on Instagram or on my website. It's like I buried that project. But I think because of that, it made me like sit down and look at like, well, how do I make a series tell the story I need to tell on its own? And I can't think of the next project that directly benefited from that. But I think as a whole, you look at how to relay information in a interesting and poignant way, so you can look back at these failures, I guess.
I've never seen those photographs that you were just talking about with the sci-fi tropes, but I have seen actually Kerry and I bought two photos from the show that you did at Aquila Space, where in the photos it was like lots of lights. I remember this one that we bought was you could see the silhouette or the outline at like dusk of the mountains, and then there was like a straight line, like a red line that you had created somehow, and the first thing I thought of was UFO when I saw that. So I don't know, as far as trajectory goes, like what you learned from what you say is, you know, the failed sci-fi trope show, maybe it makes more sense now in that package. Not saying that was a sci-fi trope, but it did have like strong sci-fi vibes.
It was a little, yeah, it was kind of abstract. I think what you're talking about is the Cloud Chamber series, I think.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Yeah, that's the thing that the Seed Lab at the museum picked up to do projections with. So that's what we were projecting for those images.
You know, I wonder if with the sci-fi trope idea, if the idea was there and it could have been executed better. Maybe it's one of those things that, I mean, like we all do. We keep coming back to like an idea that we want to execute better, or that we're waiting until we can execute it. You know, there are directors out there that have, you know, their first projects that they have been working on, or an early project that they've been working on forever, but they're like, you know, effects aren't there yet, or I can't afford to make this. And then eventually, you know, when they get to a point in their career where they're like, okay, I'm going back to that thing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have those types of projects, or I have themes that I keep coming back to over and over again. I don't think sci-fi is really like the term I would use, but sort of this outdoor, kind of abstract otherness is definitely something I try to inject, or, you know, something a little different or a little strange, you know, not too crazy. I don't want to get too crazy, but I don't. It's hard to. It's funny. It's like I have to write stuff about this and artist statements and all these things. Now that I'm talking about it, I'm having a hard time describing any of the things I do. But just being a little different.
Yeah.
And I know that's like really like a kind of a super cliche thing to say, but I think it applies. So I'll say it anyway.
Well, I completely agree with you about the artist statement thing, because I somewhat recently had to write one of those. And although I'm doing the podcast every single week, it's very difficult, or I found it very difficult to explain what it is on like the fundamental level, you know?
It's like it's hard to see the big picture when you're in the weeds a little bit. You know? And I think both of us, like I produce as much content as I can, and I hate to use that phrase, like producing content. Ugh, it's so gross. But I think you're right there with me. You're like creating continuously, and so when you're down in it, you're not really even thinking about it. You're just doing it. You know, you have that compulsion to like, oh, I have to go do stuff. I have to, you know, make sure something is happening.
You know, I talked to this UFC fighter on the podcast a while back, Lauren Murphy, and she brought up the idea of a flow state. Are you familiar with that?
Yes. Remind me again. I've heard the term, but
I think it just means basically that, like, you're on it. You know, like everything that you are attempting to do, you are doing it to the best of your ability because you have been practicing your entire life. Kind of like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, right? You have achieved all of that, and you are the best version of yourself attempting to do that thing as you can. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so I think that, getting back to what you were saying, when you find yourself like just doing the thing constantly, you know, say for me, doing another podcast, next week will be another podcast and another podcast, and I'm just moving forward, you know, just living in the present. And for you, it's like, all right, what project's next? What show do I need to work on? What what work do I need to accomplish now? And it's almost like that mentality of like, you're only as good as your next project.
Well, and that's not a mentality. That's a very real reality.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. People see the last thing you did. They don't see the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's 100% true. Yeah.
And that's scary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that applies to things like social media too.
Mm-hmm. I was trying to come up with like kind of a slick way to describe your photography, and I just kept coming back to, I don't know, this word varied. So you'll post this badass photo of the Northern Lights like we talked about earlier, but then you'll post a landscape shot with like crazy lights in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you mentioned that show that you did, or you'll post a unique portrait. And this gets back to our earlier question about what compels you to take a photo.
Oh, we're asking, we're back, huh? I haven't had time to think about it, but what compels me to take a photo? I might just fall back on this thing, this desire to create and a desire to make something worthwhile or make something interesting, or I'm not really worried about making something that someone will like or dislike, but as long as it as long as there's a reaction, if there's no reaction, then that's a clear failure. If there's just dismissal, then that's a failure. But if there's I'm into it or I'm not into it, well, then I think you're getting somewhere. You're going in a direction again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of what it comes down to. I think if I wasn't a photographer, I'd be doing something else that was in a creative field.
Like what?
Like graphic design or drawing or painting or any of these sorts of processes.
A lot of those are like solitary jobs too.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I guess you don't really see teams of painters doing stuff, but yeah, well, a lot of what I do is pretty solitary. Like most of those, there's been a few instances like on the Cloud Chamber series where there's one or two pictures where Ryan Marlowe helped out with the drone because he's got this giant monster drone with a huge light. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, it was just me by myself, going out and finding these things. And it takes a couple hours to go out and do this stuff. And then, same thing last night, messing around with icebergs. And so a lot of this is, I don't know, there's something about going off and doing a thing that no one else is doing. And okay, so that sounds cheesy again. Other people are doing things, of course, but in that spot at that moment, I'm definitely the only one doing it. The whole time I was out at Portage last night, I didn't see a single. I was out there for 2 hours. It was raining sideways and it was pretty uncomfortable, but it's like, oh, no one else is out here trying to take this weird photo. So the photos might suck. I haven't even looked at them yet, but I think there's that desire to document something a little differently. I think is that's kind of what drives me forward.
I like what you keep going back to is you'll describe yourself out on a shoot and then it always falls back to, the photos might suck. And what that keeps reminding me of is after I finish editing a podcast every week, so I'm not actually like listening to it for the conversation or whatever as I'm editing through it. I'm just making it listenable for listeners, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after I'm finished with that process and it's out there for mass consumption, my initial thought after I've spent all this time with that audio is, oh God, I bet it sucks. and then I have to go back and listen to it as a listener. And I'll listen to it and I'm like, oh, that was pretty good. I think that really like captured the essence of that conversation. And my Kerry, my wife, I'll say that to her and I'll say it a number of times a week. And she's like, can you just shut up? You know, like they're gonna be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you're protecting yourself or something.
I mean, maybe a little bit. Well, I just don't want to. Like, there are so many good artists and photographers in Alaska doing like great, amazing stuff
Mm-hmm.
that there's this thing where you're like, yeah, I'm doing cool stuff too, but these other guys, wow, such amazing work. So whether it's healthy or not, I'm always framing what I'm doing with what everyone else is doing around me. I think one of the shitty parts about being a photographer in Alaska um, is all these out of state photographers are always coming in
Mm-hmm.
and doing these like giant epic gigs. Like I just saw literally this morning, I saw this one guy came up doing an ad for these Phase One cameras, which is like super expensive medium format fancy cameras. They're like $50,000. Anyway, a little 2 minute video is all about him in the wilderness, and the whole thing was shot in turning an arm on the side of the road, but they framed it so it looked like they were out in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, man, I could have done that. So, that happens over and over and over again. You're like, or maybe not me, but one of the other 2 dozen, 3 dozen, fantastic photographers in the state could have easily done that,
Mm-hmm.
and done it much better, and not done a silly thing on the side of the road to try and make it look like you're out in the woods, but like they would have known where to go to make something amazing. But
Yeah, I feel like that happens quite a bit, no matter what you're into, whether it's photography, whether it's like, I've seen that happen in snowboarding, where you're like, oh my gosh, I know exactly where that is. And it comes off corny, to the people that know the experience, right? So you as a photographer looking at those shots and you're like, oh my God, that's on the side of the road, dude. I could have made that way more authentic, to the point where it appeals to the audience that lives in that area,
Right, exactly. Well, speaking of snowboarding, I hung out with your dad about 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
I hopped on his whatchamacallit, surfing charter. I had never done that before. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, dude, you shot some great photos. There's this like follow cam, where you're following a surfer, Tyler, maybe I think his name is.
That was Tyler, yeah.
Yeah, and he's just a really good surfer. And was that a drone?
Yes.
So as I'm watching that shot, I'm thinking like, you're close, right?
Pretty close, yeah.
And are you on shore?
No, I was shooting from the boat.
Oh, so you have like the goggles on and everything, right?
No, so it's not that. It's not one of those drones. It's still just your standard consumer drone. But I have a little iPad that I watch everything through, so I see what the drone sees.
Oh, I see.
But yeah, that was pretty stressful. I was probably lower than I should have been. I was like in between. I was bringing it down to get into the gullies of the waves and then coming back up again. I was trying to get as close as I could. Basically, I was trying to make it like not feel like a drone shot,
Mm-hmm.
or it's like static and far away. So I was trying to make it as dynamic as I could. And Tyler, of course, he's amazing. So he hopped up on this wave and did this amazing thing right in front of the camera. It's like, it was really pretty easy on my end.
And what kind of camera is attached to the drone?
Oh, that just comes with the camera. It's a little 20 megapixel. Actually, it says Hasselblad on the front of it, but that's just a sticker. But it's a little Mavic 2 or whatever.
And is it waterproof?
Absolutely not. No, no. If a wave got it, that would be the end.
That's got to be kind of nerve wracking, like you said.
Yeah. Well, and then a side effect. So, the boat I was on was still, we were pretty close to shore.
Mm-hmm.
So it was rocking back and forth, and I'm staring at this iPad, and man, I got a little bit seasick because I wasn't looking at the horizon ever. I was like staring at this pad, trying to not crash the drone or like run into anybody. So yeah, no, that was an experience. I had never. So I've been shooting these boar tie surfers for years as one of my side projects, but I had never actually shot a regular surfer on a regular wave before. So this was actually the first time I'd ever done that. So that was kind of why I, Tyler had invited me out, and so I kind of took that opportunity. I was like, I wonder if I can even do that. So, and I had big plans. I was gonna like hop in the water. I had this like waterproof. It kind of looks like a large condom type thing that like wraps around your camera to make everything waterproof. And I was gonna like splash around. But we got out there and the waves were fucking huge. And you know, one of the surfers came back almost immediately. He's like, I'm dying. I got water in my throat. I'm dying. And he was like puking off the side of the boat and stuff. And I'm like looking at these waves. I was like, you know, maybe just the drone. Maybe just the drone today. I'll hop in the water next time.
What was your first time?
Yeah, and I totally chickened out. I was like, you know what? Also, I was looking at the waves. I was like, this little camera apparatus I have is going to get destroyed. So I need to come back. I do want to come back. I need to get an actual water housing though. Do it right.
You know, I wonder, how would you describe being a photographer in Alaska to someone who's not familiar with it?
You know, I personally, you know, I don't really know, but I think being a photographer in Alaska, being a freelance photographer, and I see this with lots of people I know, you have to be good at sort of everything because the market doesn't really have room for specialization. I mean, there are a few people who are doing it pretty well. You know, we have like 2 fashion photographers, and you know, there's a couple people who only do one particular thing, but almost everyone else kind of has to like have this broad portfolio of stuff they can do because there's such a wide range of things that are coming up, and there's not enough consistency in gigs that you can be like, I only do this. So I think maybe that's the case, and I've never worked in other smaller markets before, so I don't really know, but personally that's what I've noticed. So that's like I kind of like added drone work that I can do, and you know, I think a lot of people that do that, or you know, being able to shoot film as well as video and make movies, and you know, finding a little bit of this extraness to bring to the table, which is probably what people are doing everywhere again. But I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it does. It seems like again, I can identify with that. I'm not a photographer, but I do understand having to be good at so many things at once because you have to be ready for the opportunity when it arises.
I guess, yeah, pretty much that's it. Yeah. For whatever shows up, you have to be able to do it. I mean, I guess an example, this winter, like in between January and March when things were still happening, like the range of stuff I did. So I worked on a shoot that was, we started in Anchorage and we went all the way to Fairbanks in one day. And that actually, so boy, it got really cold. Like it was like, I think it was like February. And by the time we were up near Fairbanks, like it was like -20. I was trying to fly the drone around. And like did not, you know, it wasn't a fan of that weather. And, you know, your fingers controlling the buttons, like would just, oh God, it was painful. But, and then like 2 days later, I was doing like 20 headshots in a studio. So, you know, just like the range of stuff that you need to be able to do, you know, and you have to be like a nice person too. You can't be a dick, but
for sure. You know, I bet that's that variety is actually pretty comforting as well. I mean, to be able to go out on these adventures where, you know, you're worried about your gear, you're worried about getting trapped in an ice cave, you're worried about, you know, drowning your drone under a wave, but then say you come back on Monday and you have to get those headshots. That seems a little bit like, okay, I know how to do this. You can kind of be more relaxed.
You will, except, you know, whenever I whenever I get that mindset where I was like, I got this,
Uh
that's when, I totally fuck something up.
huh.
So
For
I
sure,
try to
yeah.
I try to intentionally always be nervous with like every assignment, and like, or some local magazine needs a quick photo, right?
Hmm.
Don't think of it like oh, it's just some local magazine needs a photo. Like treat it like the New York Times is asking you to take a picture. Like and that's really hard for me. I don't always do it, but like I always try to make myself care about everything I'm doing.
Hmm. That's great. I love that. Treat everything like it's the New York Times or it's, some big legacy publication.
Yeah, treat everything like we were saying earlier. Like this is the thing that everyone's going to see. They're not going to see any of your other work.
Hmm.
This is the latest thing you just did this. Is it worth? Would you put this on Instagram, or would it, like so I try really hard to do that.
Well, and I think that most, if not every creative project has two lives, right? So you have the initial life of the final product going out there to, let's say, a publication, right? And then you have the life that the individual creates for it. Say you post your photos to your Instagram, and then that is an entirely different life from, say, the publication that it was originally published in.
Yep. And there's stipulations for that too. Sometimes they buy all the rights, and so
Mm-hmm.
you know that image lives with them forever. But other times, yeah, you shoot a thing, they use it once, and then you can do whatever with it. So, um, but yeah, no, these things take little lives, and they kind of go in different directions, and sometimes it's surprising what one image, like what doors, like a photo can open.
Do you have any advice for remaining independent and not falling into trends in photography?
Oh, no advice there. Well, because I don't think trends are necessarily a bad thing. So,
Hmm.
I think if you want to hit a trend, uh, like jump on it. Like if you, I don't know, yeah, right. Like trends can be overdone and silly and whatever, but they can also help. Like maybe the clients you're working with want that look, or
Hmm.
so I wouldn't dismiss anything because other people are doing it. But I don't know. I'm not. I guess it's hard for me to answer that because I don't really worry about that too much.
Hmm.
Like I absolutely pay attention to what people in the local community are doing because I think what they're doing is really great, and I'm like a big fan of everyone's work.
Hmm.
Um, but nationally, like I look at some of the bigger artists and I look at random stuff on Instagram, but I don't really worry about trends. It just doesn't uh, compute into my equations when I'm working on what I'm gonna do.
Hmm. I also think that career advice is tricky because everyone has such a different path.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to give advice, it's going to be difficult because, like we talked about earlier, we're only as good as our next project. So, like, if we're currently in the midst of this career, it's very difficult to be like, do it this way because, maybe that way failed for us, the one time that we tried to, do it this way. Or like you were saying earlier, the sci-fi tropes, right? Like you look at that as, oh, that one didn't go that well. So you wouldn't try to imbue like that knowledge onto somebody else.
Well, and on top of that, like the markets are changing so fast. So, when I was first getting into photography, Instagram didn't exist, social media wasn't really a thing. I was still like, I went to art school. I picked the school, well, for two reasons. One, it was like the cheapest art school on the West Coast, but also it had a really great darkroom, like just top notch.
Yeah.
It had three separate dark rooms. It had like a beginner dark room, an advanced black and white dark room, and it had a color dark room, which is just like it was like, man, that blew my mind.
Hmm.
Anyway, for 2 years, that's all I did. I just did darkroom stuff. I did like split toning and all these different crazy things, like in that darkroom for hours and hours and hours. And then I came back my junior year, and one of the darkrooms was gone and had been replaced with computers. And so it's like, what? So I do get this question every once in a while of like advice, and I was like, shit, I don't know. I spent 2 years in a darkroom during the age that digital cameras were coming to fruition. It's like I certainly don't see what things are coming. Like,
Hmm.
like I almost always gets wrong when it comes to trying to figure out what's happening next. So yeah, I would say my advice is do not take any of my advice. Like, go ask someone else.
That's great advice.
Stop asking me all these damn questions.
Stop bugging me. Go ask someone else.
Yeah.
So our mutual friend Jovel gave me some questions to ask you.
Oh no. Okay.
And for listeners who are unfamiliar with Jovel, he is also a local photographer here in Anchorage. But let's start with this question because it gets to what you were just talking about. So what do you think about the film versus digital argument in photography?
At this point, I think it's irrelevant. Uh, Mostly because I think well, I guess there's two different ways you can look at it. From the photographer side, it's all about like, well, do you want that particular aesthetic, and are you willing to wait for film to get developed, and are you willing to pay for rolls, and are you willing to like endure the harder challenge of actually getting a proper exposure on film, and the potential loss of screwing up the negatives, and like the process is so much longer on film.
Mm-hmm.
That it's it's an intentional choice, which is like the exact opposite of digital. With digital, you can do anything and whatever and go nuts.
Mm-hmm.
With film, it's such an intentional choice that's the aesthetic you are going after, and that's like film sort of holds a little bit of this level of authenticity to it that I think digital has lost or has never really had. You look at it, and even though you're looking at it on a computer because no one makes prints, you still somehow like sense, you're like, this feels like it was a physical object, like the negative was real, it's a real thing, as opposed to the digital files, which were have never been a physical object.
I talked to Brian Adams on the podcast a while back, and I'm pretty sure he's the one who said this, but I asked him a technical question about his camera, like what kind of camera does he use? And he said, is it the Hasselblad? Is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah.
And he said that he uses that because it just feels right? Like he was talking about other cameras just didn't feel right in his hand. And to me, that's what I was thinking of as you were explaining it. It's about personal preference, but it gets down to something kind of like as personal as that. Like I can't work with this camera because my fingers don't work the way that I want to with it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's I guess that cuts kind of right to it. It's like it's the thing you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, because I do shoot some film, I need like a reason to do it. Maybe like the aesthetic of film will fit this particular project.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like to shoot it. For some reason, I like doing snapshots with film more than just like random shots with digital stuff. Again, because it gives this air of authenticity, and you only have like the camera I'm using. You only get like eight or nine shots, and then that's it. You're all done.
Mm-hmm. I was looking at this next question, and I was contemplating asking you or not asking you, but
don't ask me then. Don't.
Just don't even bother.
Yeah.
just don't ask. Well, I think that Jovel gave it to me because I feel like he gave it to me for a reason. So here it is. Have you found any artists through social media that are making work that resonates with you?
Oh, I think I'm supposed to say Jovel right here. I
Oh,
think
that would make sense because these
Yeah.
other two questions would fit that.
Through social media, I do, and actually, that's one of my favorite aspects of Instagram is, following all these really interesting photographers all over the world doing just amazing stuff.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the drawback of Instagram is like I don't really know their names. I know that the picture in their profile
Mhm. And their handle.
and their handle, but I don't even look at their names anymore. So, God, I wish I could tell you. I remember the photographers from art school that I was following, like Gregory Crutzen and Jeff Wall, and like these are like old pillars of you know contemporary art photography, and
Mhm.
um, but the new stuff, I'm still following it. Man, I love what people are doing. But the names are hard unless I have my phone in front of me. Like I can find these people.
Mhm.
It takes me a couple seconds to find them, but their names are not in my brain.
Yeah, that's what's funny about Instagram is you start referring to people as their Instagram handles.
People do that to me all the time.
Tasker.
Yeah, it's a surprising number of people around town. Like I walk into Beartooth and people are like, "Hey, Tasker, Tasker, mind your own business."
Yeah, I don't know anything. Don't ask me any questions.
Yeah.
You know, I wrote this down earlier. You were saying that you're just a fan of a lot of local photographers. What photographers are those?
Um. Well, yeah. So we have Brian and Ash are both amazing.
Adams.
The Adamses. We've got Josh Corbett. He does really great film stuff, and his photography is like fantastic too. We've got Mark Lester and Lauren Holmes at the ADN.
Mhm.
Those guys are doing really great stuff. Nathaniel Wilder, he's really great. Um, who else? I get down this list and I start forgetting who I've already named.
Well, you forgot Jovel.
Oh, well, I already mentioned him. But no,
I mean, I think you're doing a good job.
yeah, I'm trying to think of who else. I started good and then I tapered off. There's oh boy, what's his name? He's a photographer in Juneau. Shoot.
I know Jeremy Lavender in Juneau.
Oh yeah, he's good. He does the snowboard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm trying to think. There's someone who was doing some really great stuff, and now I can't remember. You know what? I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'm pulling up my phone.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so yeah, Young Kim. He had work up in the museum for a long time.
Mm-hmm. He's great.
Yeah. Emily Mesner. I don't know. I don't know if I got her name right. She used to work at the Cordova Times. I'm not totally sure what she's up to now, but she was doing really great stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think I actually follow her.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
There was. There's lots of,
There's a whole gang of them.
there's just, I would say there's a solid 20 or 30 photographers that I sort of consider my peers, and they're all just doing fantastic stuff.
You know, I think this all really gets to the heart of this next question, which is what's the story behind your green trucker hat?
Oh, the Lopez kayak hat?
I'm not sure. This is another Jovel question.
Oh, of course it is. Okay. That's funny. I haven't worn that hat in a long time. So I like to wear hats because my hair is always kind of unruly, and I hate messing with it. So I just put a hat on,
Mm-hmm.
and that is probably like the the lamest, boringest story behind like.
That's it. You just put a hat on.
I see the hat and I put the hat on and there's the story.
There's no great story of like
No.
how you got the hat
It's
or
like,
what the hat
actually,
represents.
Yeah, my dad was dying and this was his last wish, was that I always wear a hat, and if I take it off, my ear goes numb. I don't know. No, just a hat.
That's great.
I think that last question was kind of dumb. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm gonna do the opposite of the Annie Zink thing. She's always like, "Oh, that's a great question." Whenever she gets asked questions,
Yeah.
you're like, "No, that's a dumb question."
I like this persona that you have created throughout this entire podcast of don't ask me any questions, and that was a dumb question.
I thought about, actually, beforehand, I was like, what if I just, because everyone's always like, oh, great question. Let me ask. We're like, well, that's a really dumb question, but I'm going to answer it anyway. You asked it. You're like, great. Thanks. Really happy to be here.
Well, that does it for my stupid questions, Kerry.
Okay. Well, I think your questions were great. It was Javel's questions were horrible.
Unless you have anything else you want to add to that.
No, I don't think so. How many of these podcasts have you done now?
I think this will be episode 71.
Wow.
Yeah. Did you have fun?
Yeah, this was great.
Is it better than you thought it was going to be?
It's about what I thought it would be.
Really?
Yeah, that's right. It's right where I thought things would happen. Yeah. No, this is it's not worse.
Was there a worst case scenario? You're like, I could go into this and it could just be like,
oh, just maybe just every question is painful, and he's like, why does he keep digging for my soul? Or I don't know. Or maybe we could do something. Could this be the podcast where it's just like 45 minutes of silence?
Yeah, just dead air.
We could get real artsy with it. It's not dead air. Like, you can still hear us breathing.
Or what if we went about our daily routine? Like, you could still hear your son and you could hear my cats cleaning themselves.
Oh. That would be like, two phones that have butt dialed each other, and we're just going to listen in for an hour and a half.
Oh my! I feel like if Andy Kaufman was still around, that would be one of his gags.
This is where we're going with that. This is where, I think for your 100th, if you continue making these for another 20 or 30,
mm-hmm.
You should do something wacky. You could do a wacky one.
A butt dial episode.
Yeah.
That's it. I will reconvene with you on the 100th episode, and it will be the butt dial episode.
Okay. I don't put me on stone on that, but we'll work on the details. But
yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, Kerry, dude, it was awesome talking to you, man.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
All right, you take it easy.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
For more information about how you can support local grassroots journalism, go to www.patreon.com/Crude Magazine. Crude Conversations is written, hosted, and produced by me, Cody Liska, for Crude Magazine. Music was produced by Alcoda Beats.